Casting a spell on you, this is Sega Masters. Now that's something you don't see every day, especially in a 1980s video game intro. Sega's interest in supporting the Master System in the US may have been waning by September of 1989, yet today's video shows they could still produce some interesting and unique experiences for their console when they felt like it. SpellCaster certainly qualifies as one of those carts that attempts to blend two vastly different genres together and mostly succeeds. This adventure centers around Kane, a student of the mystic arts living in some undefined era of Japan. As the cartridge opens, we find Kane answering a summons from his mentor Daikak, who informs you about a series of sacred temples that are being attacked and vandalized by an unknown army of possibly evil forces, and he fears the motivations behind these assaults. Daikak recently dispatched a detachment of 10 soldiers to guard a potential target, but hasn't heard from them for some time, so he asks Kane to investigate. Not surprisingly, this is but the prelude to an even bigger plot that threatens the entire world and that somehow only Kane can resolve. Interestingly enough, SpellCaster is actually a westernized version of a cartridge Sega released for the Mark III a year earlier in Japan that was tied to a popular manga series at the time, Kujaku-U, which translates to Peacock King. Debuting in 1985 and running for 4 years in weekly Young Jump magazine, the series chronicles the adventures of the young Buddhist monk Kujaku, also known as Peacock, who uses his supernatural powers to combat the demons, evil spirits, and curses haunting modern-day Japan. It's admittedly one of the more graphic mangas, with plenty of mature themes, and definitely not for the faint of heart. Kujaku-U did well enough to spawn an animated series, a pair of live-action films, and even a few video game tie-ins, one of which appeared on the Mark III as Sega tapped into the manga's popularity in a last-ditch effort to sell their console in Japan. For whatever reason, Sega decided to bring Kujaku-U to the Western market a year later, the last Mark III cartridge to get released outside of Japan, though it was reskinned as SpellCaster with all references to the manga removed since the series was unknown outside of Japan back then. They probably also figured the subject matter would be a bit too controversial for American audiences as well. The opening minute of this game might give you the impression that you're in for a point-and-click mystery adventure, none unlike Shadowgate or Portopia. You certainly have the usual commands available, though most of them don't really do anything at this starting point of the quest. However, when you use the move command, you're not automatically teleported to the next important location as in other similar games. Instead, SpellCaster forces you to play through an arcade-style platforming stage that I'm assuming represents you traveling to your intended destination. These horizontally scrolling segments might remind you of Sega's earlier release Kenseiden, as you travel from one end of the corridor to the other while plenty of supernatural creatures and other baddies cross your path looking to terminate your journey. Kane has his Kai energy to defend himself, which he shoots out as projectiles. You can either fire off quick normal shots or hold down the fire button to charge up energy for a more powerful attack. Now you're probably curious about any actual spellcasting that's suggested by the title. As it so happens, Kane has a variety of magical attacks and abilities at his disposal, and you'll find them on the status screen that's accessed by pushing the pause button on the console itself. Once you pick one of the spells to equip, you just charge up your energy, then push down on the D-pad to unleash it. Of course, knowledge of how each spell works is imperative as certain magics are best for different situations. The Hakuji spell, for example, fires off a laser beam that cuts through just about anything. Other spells let you shoot giant fireballs, unleash tornadoes and lightning, heal yourself, and even hover in the air for short distances. Each spell requires a certain amount of spiritual energy to use, which you replenish by collecting the orange orbs dropped by the defeated baddies, while the blue orbs restore your physical stamina. Once you reach your destination at the end of the level, you're treated to another adventure segment that presents the next part of the story as Kane gathers clues for his quest. One thing you'll notice is how well done the visuals are throughout the cartridge, which isn't surprising since much of the artwork was done by a pair of Sega superstars in Riko Kodama and Naoto Oshima. The adventure segments in particular feature some nicely detailed illustrations depicting your surroundings and the person you're conversing with. Each character's lips do move as their dialogue is displayed on the screen. The way Kane's expression changes in his portrait depending on the situation is a cool touch as well. When you return to Daikak to report your findings, he'll send you to the next essential location, as well as enable the game's password feature. Yes, instead of a battery, SpellCaster records your progress through a rather tedious password, which you can only receive during the adventure segments. As you can see here, the narrative does feature a number of glaring typos, as if the programmers couldn't be bothered to do a little proofreading. Many of the adventure scenes are there just to advance the story, yet quite a few of them also require you to either collect whatever special items just happens to be lying around, or using the tall command to converse with whomever is present in order to obtain the keyword needed to unlock your next destination. Though you sometimes have to actually point and click at something on the screen with the floating hand cursor to trigger their appearance. Incidentally, the spaghetti vendor becomes an important ally in your quest since he offers food that can restore your physical health, one of several people willing to do so. Then comes more platforming, and you switch back and forth between the two gameplay styles throughout your journey, as the action stages are basically used to bridge each adventure portion. And this combination actually works well for the most part. It helps that many of the action segments are well designed and unfold at a nice brisk pace. Kane is a bit on the slow side but generally handles well, with none of the slippery controls found in many Master System platformers. The action segments also take place in some vibrantly colored environments populated with detailed sprites sporting smooth animation for the most part, with very little slowdown present, even though some flicker does pop up on occasion. The background themes also do a good job of contributing to the atmosphere of each level, and some may feel the normal PSG tunes are actually better than the hidden FM music that can be accessed on modded consoles. The sound effects, on the other hand, are the usual Master System fare, though they aren't too annoying. However, the gameplay does feature a few wrinkles. Other than the spells, your Kai projectiles are your only offense. While you can obtain weapons at certain points during your quest, you don't actually wield them. They only serve to bolster your projectile's attack power. You can't walk and attack at the same time either, and most of the baddies that cross your path tend to lunge at you, constantly forcing you to be on the defensive. When leaping across pits and gaps, you do have to get used to aiming for the middle of the platforms, as some jumps that seem like they should land may actually fall short. Some of the stages do contain a few unfortunate surprises that can lead to more than a few cheap deaths. Oddly enough, should you perish on an action stage, you don't get a game over. Instead, you're resurrected back at the Summit Temple, and after getting a sharp rebuking from Daikak, you're offered the option of either restarting the level you fell at, or taking a break and resuming your adventure later with the password. Using your magic is essential to succeed on your quest, yet having to charge up energy and push down on the D-pad can feel awkward at times, especially at certain spots during your journey where you may need to bust out a quick Makiri spell to save yourself from falling into a pit. It's also rather annoying how you can only equip and change spells by using the pause button on the console itself, even though the programmers could have used the second controller to work around this, as in similar titles. So you better hope you have your consoles physically located within reaching distance if you need to switch spells at the drop of a hat. At least there's no cap on how much energy you can accumulate by collecting the orange orbs, and with no timer or anything to force you to keep moving forward, you are free to stay in one area for a minute or two and farm up to 999 spiritual points should you choose, especially in the early going. Some of the action segments do feature a boss you need to battle in order to obtain a critical clue or item, and these guys won't hesitate in letting you know how they feel about you, adding a nice bit of personality to the narrative. While a few of these brutes are more challenging than others, many of them have patterns that are not too difficult to deduce and exploit, so it's often a matter of dodging their attacks and getting in your Kai Blast when the opening presents itself. In some instances, a spell or two is all that's needed to dispose of these bosses. The adventure segments flow smoothly for the most part, yet aren't without a few sticking points of their own. In some instances, you can clearly see an item of possible importance, yet the cart claims there's nothing to take even when you have the floating hand cursor pointing right at it. You're often forced to use the look command several times to finally get the game to acknowledge that there is in fact something there for you to take before you're finally permitted to obtain the artifact in question. Eventually, the adventure segments require a bit of problem solving to continue the narrative, yet there's hardly any real in-depth detective work needed since it's all but impossible to get stuck. Overcoming these roadblocks are usually a matter of merely trying every item or spell in your inventory and repeatedly getting told it's no use until something positive actually happens, and there's no penalty for wrong guesses. Some adventure purists may not like being led through these segments, yet it eliminates any needless wandering about and helps keep the plot moving. Overall, the two gameplay modes actually mesh well together, and the difficulty isn't too hard for much of your quest despite a few bumps in the road. The story that unfolds throughout your journey is intriguing with a few nice twists to it, if you can overlook the poor translation in spots. Unfortunately, things take a sharp turn upward as you near the conclusion of your quest, starting with the pyramid. You better hope you have a good map available as you're confronted with a huge, confusing maze full of doors to dead ends and stairs to nowhere that takes as long to navigate as everything that came before it. Not to mention trying to climb up the stairs before getting knocked back off by an enemy and being forced to try again, which makes this area even more of a headache. That's followed by the Underworld, which is almost as tedious since you're forced to march back and forth through a single level filled with annoying enemies as you talk to several different characters, and go on a few fetch quests to obtain the items necessary to open the path to the final challenge. Oddly enough, that final challenge is an overhead shooter segment, where Kane takes to the air to battle a gauntlet of the last set of enemies, keeping him from reaching the final boss and saving the world. SpellCaster may seem deep at times, but in truth it's actually a rather short game, not requiring more than a few hours to complete. And you're basically stuck following one linear path from the beginning to the conclusion, with no alternate paths you can take to reach the end. As a result, this cart seems like it just exists to tell its tale before you move on to other things, though you do get a nice sense of accomplishment should you triumph over the ultimate enemy at the end of your journey. In conclusion, despite some frustrating flaws, especially toward the endgame, and the lack of any replayability, SpellCaster is still worth checking out at least once just to experience the unique meshing of the two gameplay styles as well as the engaging story, though you'll have little reason to ever fire it back up again once you see the ending.